All right, welcome. Today we are going to do an unboxing of a U-tape project, which is to create a longsword. The basic tech is PVC, pipe insulation, and duct tape. And what comes in the kit is your core, which is a half-inch piece of PVC with a connector attached. And what's important is the connector has been heated up and attached to the pipe, so this is all one piece. If you try to build this and you glue them together, they'll snap in half. So if somebody looks at this and goes, "That will break, Mr. Wizard," this is how we do to fix that. So the other piece is your crossbar connectors. So you'll put these in these locations. This will get you a nice sturdy crossbar that you can actually block with instead of a floppy piece of foam. So we're going to walk through the other pieces that's in the kit. So one of the other key pieces is that this is a semi-flat blade. So if you can see this, instead of just being a round sword that kind of looks, or a popsicle stick, we tried to create something that showed a this is the actual striking surface, has kind of a flat side, so it's a little artistic looking, and you get a little extra padding on the actual striking surface. If you're not hitting really hard, that extra padding is purely decorative, so you could technically just have a full round sword. Been fighting with those for many years without any problems, so this is just more safe, I guess. So the pieces you'd have is, past the core, this is the outer insulation that's used for the blade. And then, of course, you'll have a couple of small pieces of insulation that will be attached to the core that will create the appearance of it being a flat blade by elongating it into an oval. And then, as an option, we've added a couple of pieces that you can put on the handle so that you can have a grip that kind of squeezes and gives. If you don't like this type of handle, a lot of people will use rope. There's just a lot of different techniques based on your personal preferences. So the other pieces you'll have is some laser cut out pieces of foam. And so you get 4 of these, which will be put to cap each one of the end pieces of the core. And then you'll get 3 of these round caps that will go over the top of the cross guards and then the pommel. And then because your blade is going to be slightly oval, there'll be an oval cap that goes over the top. And then you'll receive a piece of foam that's cut for your pommel, so that you'll have a little bit extra guard there. And then 2 of your pieces for the cross guards, so it'll be covered. So what doesn't come in the kit that you see on the table is it's a U-tape, so you provide your own tape. One, to talk a little bit about choice in tape, I prefer the 3M or anything of that level of quality. If you go to Harbor Freight and get really cheap tape, when it gets hot, it'll unpeel. If you get really high quality tape, such as Gorilla tape, it is very stiff. It will, this is when people say duct tape cuts you. Not only does it have no give, but it'll create a knife edge. So you actually want the mid-quality tape. It provides, the best boffer weapons. And then we color our pommels for what team you're on. So colored duct tape, also brought by 3M. There is some really thick colored duct tape, so be careful of that. Even though it's not a striking surface, it makes holding the edges down much more difficult. And then my personal preference for handles, and again, this is all optional, is I use a cloth tape, and this is for hockey sticks, and we'll put all of the links to what these pieces are in the description. Again, if you were going to use rope, you just ignore this piece, but I'm going to build it the way I like it, and you can change it any way you want. So we're going to start out. So the first thing I do is I am going to put on the ends of each one of the pieces with the small tape. So what you want to do is create a cap, and the best tape to use for that is strapping tape. It's reinforced, but instead of having you go out and buy your own piece, we're going to do this entire project out of duct tape, and it doesn't actually affect the performance of the sword in any way. So you're going to put a piece of duct tape around the cap, and you're basically just stopping it from being a open circle. And so you put one piece around that way, and then you take another piece of duct tape and you just reinforce around that edge. So you're going to have a piece, and this basically just stops the foam from sliding in to the PVC and cutting up the foam. So that's the whole point of that. So first thing I'm going to do is just cap all the sides. So I'm going to just repeat all 3 of these really quickly. And if you have problems cutting duct tape with your fingers because you haven't been doing it for many, many years, you can use a pair of scissors. Your wife's sewing scissors are the preferred because they got the best edge. Just make sure she doesn't catch you. So, or you can go to the dollar store and do the right thing and buy really cheap scissors. And those work just as well on duct tape. So, the reason I put the tape around the edge here is that it holds everything down so it doesn't pull the tape up and create a hole here. And it just makes your sword last a lot longer if you take that extra step. You can also, I'll show you an alternative for the tip. I cut the duct tape in half. That way it sits over it a little nicer. I then double that up. So you just basically build an X. Slide it down, try to keep the wrinkles out of it the best you can, and then of course exactly the same. You're going to end up with something that has a capped in on all sides. You're going to push this in, make sure it's well seated. Optionally, you can put a drop of super glue in the connectors at this point to stop these from popping out, but when you see how we tape this whole thing together, it will have absolutely no effect. It'll just make you feel better about yourself. So the next step is that we're going to put these small caps on each one of these locations, and this gives you a little bit of padding here on each one of the tips. So I'm going to show you a kind of a neat technique for this. So this one, because of how much extra padding occurs everywhere else, this doesn't need to be held tight. It just needs to be held in place until the rest of the tape is in. So you just roll around, and you don't want to compress the foam or do anything weird. So it's just on there, and it's on there pretty strong just using one piece of duct tape. You know, the temptation to go back and forth across the tip, what that does is it reduces the effectiveness of the foam and its compression. So you really only want the tape on the side. So it's not just a shortcut, but it has a technical reason for doing that. So then we're just going to repeat this process again. It makes absolutely no difference which side, the bumpy side or the top side, goes out. So now we have everything, one layer of foam on every tip that goes out, from tip to pommel cross guards. So the next step, we are going to put the blade together. So the way we're going to start with that, we start from the inside, of course. So this is going to be, imagine the sword, this is the striking surface, one side or the other side. And you just don't want to have the foam going this way, because then your sword would look funny and would be kind of useless to you. So the key thing is just line it up with the T connectors and you will be fine. So this is a pinning action because it will be inside, but you want to actually pin this fairly well because the blade is going to take a lot of punishment. So I start out with about a 2-inch piece of duct tape, and I just pin one side. I pull it out, and then I'm going to pin the opposite side, and then I'm going to do a couple pins in the middle. You don't want to tape as you go because you'll end up subconsciously compressing it. You can't adjust if you get crooked. So I'm going to hold this up, and I have this piece cut a little long, so you're going to have something like this, which is held in place. Now I'm going to put a couple more here so this doesn't do this inside the foam, because this is all going to be encased inside the actual blade foam. So, and again, this is more decoration that's inside that gives the shape. So that's the key to this. So, and again, try not to compress the foam. Alternatively, if you don't want to use duct tape in this process, packing tape works really well. Probably the better solution if you have the materials, because there's no structure to what that's going on. And strapping tape and packing tape are both extraordinarily strong with this type of force that it's going to be taking, because there's no shear force against this side of the blade. So then I'm going to repeat what I did exactly on the opposite side. Start down here at the cross guard, and it's okay if you're not 100% straight until you actually apply the tape. So I always get the tape onto the foam and then apply the foam, or apply the tape onto the core. So I get that started, and then I kind of pull the foam a little bit, just minor pull, and that helps straighten this out so I can look down the blade. This is your one chance before you do your pinning action that, yes, I'm actually on. So this one is obviously crooked. So I had that, whoops, I made a mistake. So it's duct tape on top of duct tape. So you can peel this back. Draw this on. Once I get this pinned, I can do some adjustments. So I'm going to get it pinned really quick. I go right over the other section. It doesn't really matter. Again, this is just to stop it from wiggling underneath the main blade. You don't need to use any spray adhesive or anything like that. It just adds complexity and mess. So this is what it's going to look like at this stage. So you have what would look like a flat blade, and of course you don't want to hit anybody with the side of the pipe, and you'd like a little bit extra padding there. So we're going to add our actual blade foams. So we are going to, this is already pre-slit down the edge. What you want to make sure, and this is probably the most critical part of the construction, is that you want to make sure that the opening to your foam is on what would be your flat blade, so you're not striking people with the seam. So, right seam, so you take this all the way up, and then you're going to slide this piece in. Okay, so now it's slightly open, so now we're going to do a pinning action all the way down to seal this blade shut. So you're gonna want about 2-inch pieces of tape. I put one on one side. What you want to do is you want to pull the foam so that the bottom of the foam is also touching. If you don't do that, only the tips will be touching and it'll be at an awkward angle. So there's a little bit of a technique there where you're pinching in and taping down so that these bottom pieces are lined up. And after you do a couple lines, you'll say, oh, that one's doing a little bit of puckering. I can go back and fix that. So you have a little bit, about the length of a duct tape apart, you can have gaps, and then we're going to run a strip down the middle. If you go any further than that, this gap will be really wide, and putting the tape down the middle is going to leave an obvious line that is not that great. You can, of course, put duct tape the entire length if you want. To smooth out if you got a wrinkle. There you go. So this is the puckering. So if you've got something that has a little extra puckering, you pinch it shut, and then you put it over the top. So we'll just work right down the blade. What you don't want to do at this stage, you might be tempted with that. I'm going to start spiral wrapping. That comes later. You'll see that, that's what the end effect is. But if you do that now, you're not going to have the nice wetting of the foam here. So this is a little bit of the meticulous smithing that you want to do. Said if you try to do the whole thing one right on top of the other, it gets very painful because you'll end up just never being happy with how you're taping. So I'm not that happy with this section, so I'm going to put a little extra tape there. Okay. So now our next step is we're going to trim this all flush, and then I'm going to put a piece of tape right up here. So I'm going to make that flat. So now I'm going to put a piece of tape down the length. I know what you're saying. No, that's what cuts people. You have to spiral wrap. Yeah, this is inside the blade. So this is just to reinforce that seam. If you see really big gaps or anything weird, this is the time to stop and fix. So at this point, you should have, you might be able to see a little bit of an indent, but for the most part, it is completely flush. So while we're working on the blade, we're going to do the tipping. So I suggest 15%, but it's up to you. So I'm going to cut the tape here in half. I always like using half pieces of tape whenever I'm doing part of the critical pieces because it's less likely to pucker. So now I'm going to line up. This is the oval piece. I put the dots on the inside because this is actually what you're going to see. And if you don't do that, you have that, why are there bumps on the end of my sword? What did it catch? So that's your first pinning action. And then we're going to just basically build an X. And again, do not compress this foam. They'll be tempted with that. Oh, I have to be extra safe. You're actually making the sword worse by doing that. So just kind of make sure that it won't move. And here we're just doing the exact same X, but we're going across the other axis. So you want to make sure that this is really critical, that you are smoothing this out. If you have really big wrinkles, this is where it can catch debris, like dirt and stuff like that. And then this is the part that hits people. And so you want to make sure that's nice and, oops, extra piece here. If you pull the tape really tight, the tape will be more likely to pull back up. It'll fight you. You'll have won during construction, but over the years, and I've had these last for years, the tape will start peeling up anywhere that you pull tight. So try to avoid fighting your weapon while you're building it. So now you have the tip built. It's got 2 layers of foam, which I thrust with these weapons, but I do not hit hard. Which is perfectly fine for that if you know how to keep your arm loose and so forth, but more than enough padding to be safe. That small piece that we put on the inside is going to help protect this piece from the core pushing through. So this piece is done. So now we're going to flip over, and I like to do the finish in taping all at once, so kind of do all the structural pieces at one time, and then I can get in, because this is when you have the opportunity of, oh, I want my blade a different color, I want something like that, then you've at least got all of the inside dirty parts done first. So now you have 3 pieces of foam, and they have that weight. One of them looks a little different than the other. Grab the 2 that are the same size. Your smaller one, which is 2 inches, is actually your pommel. So if you don't do that, you're going to go, what happened? So just so we get the what happened out of the way, I'm going to put the pommel on first. So this should, with a little bit of just twisting, should just slide on. If you're having problems because of the tape, there's a technique that I always like to suggest. You can spray your handle with hairspray. Hairspray is a lubricant when wet and an adhesive when dry. It is absolutely magical. And so you shouldn't have to use it, but if for some reason you're having problems or you're building 1,000 of these, hairspray is just fun for everyone. So next step is I seal the seam because we have tape underneath this, so it's going to slightly stress the foam. So this gives the seam a little extra protection before I start doing anything else. And then this is extraordinarily similar to the tip. So the difference is you have 3 of these. Now you can't do anything wrong because you only got 3 of these left and they're all exactly the same. So again, I put the pointy side in just because this is a surface that could go up and hit somebody. And I don't know if you'd ever be harmed by tiny little pieces of foam, but I just like the way it looks. So we're going to do that same X technique because that works really well. So one of the techniques I use, I just put the foam on the table and then that way I can center it. Then I just use my index finger, pull down gently, smooth, make sure you don't have a lot of puckering around this corner because it only gets worse the faster you try to go. So I'll start out with that piece. And then I'm just not putting any pressure. It's just going to hold this in place. So this is one piece. So I'm going to make my pommel colored. So I'm going to stop here and I'm going to switch over to my colored duct tape. You do not have to do this. This is completely optional. But again, I like the way this looks of having a colored sword for determining what team you're on or your personal colors. So the reason I do the bottom in gray duct tape is just because if nobody's going to see it, then there's no reason to tape it in colored tape, because typically colored tape is more expensive. But so the reason I put that extra piece of tape, you have that, why didn't you just put minimum amount of tape on here? The miracle, the number of people that put their swords on the ground and then rest on them. The pommel takes a lot more damage than it should just through neglect, especially if you lend your stuff out to people. So I always put one extra set of the X of the gray tape on the bottom just to help hold that firm. There's also people that do something called pommel fighting. They want to get a few extra inches, so they just hold onto the sword by the pommel, and that wears weapons out a little bit faster. So I like to make sure that this cap has got a little extra security. All right, so if done correctly, you should be able to spin your sword around, and about 1/2 inch down, you should see no gray. This is just capped and covered. That was the whole point of this. The rest of this, we're going to tape down, and everything will be, great, but you want to make sure your cap looks good. And then we'll put one finishing piece on the side. So before we do any taping down, we're going to put our hand grip on, because you actually tape down onto the hand grip. So these are your hand grips, your 2 little small pieces. Very much the exact same process as the blade, except you're not going to put an outer cover on. So I am going to use the gray tape to do our pinning action. This, you don't have to worry about compressing nearly as much because you're not striking people with your handle. And when I tape this down, I tape it down pretty hard because I don't want a lot of compression in my handle when I fight, but I want it to have a little bit of give, because if your grip is squishy, you can't do really fine tip work and fencing and so forth. It's just 90% of the sword is your grip for technique. So that's why it's up to your personal preference of how you build a handle. Again, this is lined up. It should be lined up right with your blade so that when you hold onto the sword, your edge of the blade will be facing the correct direction. It's also really helpful to have kind of an oval grip so that when you grab your weapon, if you're not even looking at your weapon, you can orientate it in your hand quickly. I want absolutely no movement in my handle. And I'm going to do a slight spiral wrap to make sure that And I'm just tucking this down as I go so that it's adhering. I don't need to spiral wrap past this because I'm still going to put some other pieces. So now this is when you'd kind of do I like this level of compression? You still have one more, if you use the cloth tape, one more option to wrap this down. Some people will compress and put little grip handles. I found no value in that, but I've seen it looks cool. But so right now you don't have to worry about, does this part of the sword feel kind of odd? Once you put the cloth tape on, this all kind of works itself out. So we're gonna work our way over to the cross guards now, because when we get done taping this, we want to be all kind of in the same structural part of the project. What people tend to want to do is they get ahead of themselves. They start doing the decorative tape, and then they have oh wait, now I have structural tape and gray and pieces, and so I'm going to just slice this open and tape it back shut. If you do that, my recommendation is you always want all of your padding facing towards your opponent, and this piece up here. So unlike the blade where it's down the side, this is the least amount of harm that can happen if there was ever kind of a problem. So I'm going to take a small piece of tape. This is quite a gap because we're going over the connector. This pipe insulation wasn't meant to do that. So I'm going to compress that down. And I'm going to compress this down. I'm going to pull the tape back because I'm going to do some trimming. So this has got a little bit of a divot in here, so we're going to take our scissors and we are just going to cut it flush. So now you have your foam in here and you have it out to the end. So we're going to repeat the process on the other side. So I'm going to cut this open. Now if you use strapping tape on this part of the blade, you don't have to cut this open. It's slicker and it's actually a thinner tape. So then I'm going to trim. Make sure I don't have any slop. Okay, so now both of these are the same. So now you have your two extra pieces. So we're going to attach those. Exact same as the back end. So because we're going to do a a blue handle, we're going to use blue tape. The cross guards, I don't even put the extra piece of gray tape underneath because you're not putting weight on the side of a cross guard. So we're going to do our pinning action there. What's one of the critical things is, don't try to min-max on your tape and just go like a millimeter down or anything like that. Give it some meat. Give it a finger's length. It'll make all the difference in how long your weapon lasts. It's a miracle how you put a lot of work in the weapon and then you go short on some of the most odd locations. So I'm going to show you what the smallest side I would ever do. Right about there. Anything shorter than that, and it's just throw the tape away. It's not, or use it for some pinning or patchwork pieces when you're doing your decorative taping. But okay. So now, basically, your pommels have about the same amount of compression as the tip of your weapon, so it's got 2 layers of foam. So if this ever happened and you hit somebody, it would be annoying, but it's not going to be dangerous. So assuming you're not hitting at full force. So we're just going to repeat the process on the other. Again, putting the spiky side down. One of the things I like to do when I'm taping on the decorative side is I really go soft until it's in place, and then I smooth, because it's a lot easier to pull the tape up if it's not truly adhered. So I'll just go down, and I'm not really putting a lot of pressure there, and then I go back and I smooth it out. So your check again is you're going to look around the outer edge. About a 1/2 inch down should be completely covered. Okay, so now we're in a good place. So now we're going to finish up our taping of our pommel and then move back to this location. So this is all going to be really visible, so we are going to use our blue tape. And again, this looks like you can just put this tape right here and it won't cause a problem. What it does is it puckers really bad on these corners, and it will look good for a couple of days, but then it just falls apart and it just starts coming up. So I put a piece down. I am using my fingernail to go down. I am not trying to press that foam in any way. So I'm not trying to fight that. So I'm going to let it go down and build that natural shelf. If you push this down or you play games with that, it's the first thing that's going to start coming up. So, and I just go halfway up the tape, because at the end I'm going to put a piece around here that pins these two pieces together. So I do that because if I ever have to repair a sword, then I don't have tape going all the way up one side and so forth. So it's all right. So there's my thumb there again. Most of the build of this sword is making little X's. So that one could have been a little bit more centered. So now I have kind of a thin side. This one you don't have to worry about using your thumb as much because it's going to go right onto your grip. And take the other side. And we're going to smooth that round. Since it's a little big, that's got a little pucker. So we'll see what we can do in the next step to compensate for that. So now you got these little corners. And as you guess, we put the other side of the X on. And if you don't get good at ripping duct tape, just practice at it. I mean, you'll want to give up if you're just brand new to doing this and start cutting everything with scissors. It easily, triples or quadruples the length of time it takes you to make a sword. So just waste 4 feet of duct tape and learn the skill. It'll make you a lot happier in the long run. So, and if you just for some reason cannot cut the duct tape, change brands. As I said, you may be working with something that's a little bit more structural integrity than you want, and you may make sure you're not using something like the Gorilla duct tape, because it will it's thick enough that how is he cutting this with his hands? Well, it's kind of an indication it's 5 times thicker than what I'm using. So all duct tape should easily cut right down the sides. I mean, there's no trick to this. So, but it's a confidence thing. You start hesitating and you won't be able to cut the tape. So I'll tell you can do it, so you can do it. Okay, so now we have our last piece. That's for the pommel, going down. I'm gripping that. So then I'm going to take my piece that just goes around the pommel. So I just put it right in the center. And this holds all of those little tails in place. Cut that off. Make sure that this is really loose when you do this and put it on, because if you pull this tight, this is the piece that will pull up first. So you want to make sure you're not fighting the duct tape. Just let it go where it wants to go and then just squeeze it into place. Because if you stretch it really hard, it will pull back, it'll lift up, dirt will get underneath that, it'll just be kind of Not a safety issue, just annoying. So here's an example of puckering because we have that larger piece. So we'll look when we get back here to putting this piece on if we actually want to trim that and then put some tape on to cover that up, because that's a point that will pull up. Okay, so now we are at the cross guard again. Make sure these pieces are in place. So now you're going to say, hey, there's hard plastic here. You can hit somebody. Yeah, it's the same hard plastic that's part of your handle. But if you're up there fighting this close up into your weapon, you are past the blade, you're into where you'd be punching somebody with your knuckles anyway. So just hit them with your knuckles if you're worried about that. So, or play safely. I mean, option B. So now we have that. Should I do this? Well, no, because that's going to create that puckering. So we're going to measure out the tape, but we're going to, of course, cut it in half. And I have tried different methods, and I'd love to learn one of cutting my duct tape in half so that I'm not cutting it personally in half each time. But the bandsaws I've ruined lives. So I'm going to put that in. That's going to pull this across. Now you see why, once I have the other piece on, these pieces are not going to come across. It's going to be duct taped from both sides, pulling your cross guards in. Unless you're playing tug of war with your sword. Even then, the way we wrap it, yeah, go ahead and play tug of war. That's fine. So, and again, whenever you're doing a transition from one layer to the other, let it go down the layer, because anytime you pull tight and push really hard, that's the first piece to come up. So we have a transition piece here, and then we're just going to work our way around doing these little X patterns. So now I'm going from this side just to the edge. Getting kind of into the finishing taping on this side, and then we'll so this is going to go in, and the important thing is we'll make these things straight so that when you make your other pieces, just sometimes looking right down the sword helps. Put it on down, let your fingernail get into the corner. And I will be the second to admit I am not the best taper out there. It's not my forte. I tend to be a structural guy. But this technique makes it so that even if you're not that great, it's very forgiving. Now, if you don't like the duct tape look on this, you can also go to the dollar store and get women's trouser socks. They are incredibly comfortable, but they can be used to cover up the blades and the side pieces. So that's a alternative to duct tape if you have that, hey, this seems to be a lot of work. You still have to put the structural pieces in because it doesn't give you the support of other women's garments, but it's really good for making a nice cloth cover if that's the direction you want to go with your weapon. So this here, this piece is a little bit too small to go all the way across. So I am going to, we're getting to kind of the decorative taping. I'm going to just make a layer over here, and then I'm just going to work my way around. All right, so you want that to look really nice because that's the part you're going to be looking at. So we have some structural pieces. I always like to do the part that is more likely to pull up first, and so that is this here, and then we'll go back and do these, basically covering the foam steps. So. Right. So again, it's probably getting old, but use your fingernail down in there. Make sure that you're kind of level. Now you're just kind of filling in the gaps. A little bit of puckering there, so I'll show you a technique at the end to kind of help that out. Okay, so that piece. And there's hundreds of ways to do this taping. This is how I do it. So again, if you want to get creative, there's some things I suggest you don't do. And that is try to do it all in one piece without cutting any tape, and I'm going to just keep rolling it around. Your taping, unless you're an absolute master, is going to look really bad no matter what you do. Like I said, if you have low skill, you use a lot of little pieces of tape, and that's what I'm doing. Here you get just a lot better piece. There's also duct tape out there that doesn't stick well after a while, and so that's why I stick to the 3M. That duct tape that doesn't stick well, it doesn't have any problem if it's the inside duct tape, if you're going to wrap at the end. So if you find something that doesn't work for the whole thing or the finish, and hey, this is peeling up, these little pinning pieces and so forth, once it's sealed in another layer of duct tape, it's not going to be a problem. So the problem with having multiple types of tape that aren't obvious, like blue and gray, is that you'll forget which one was good and which one's going to make my sword look bad. So, right. So we use our thumb in there again. It's starting to come together and look like a sword. If you're really worried about this plastic piece being visible and so forth, you can take a little extra piece of foam and stick it over the top. But I used to do that, and I had that. I am never hitting somebody with this part of the sword. And again, these swords, they're designed for light hitting. So there's just a lot of things you can get away with if you're not swinging as hard as you can. Okay, so now we have that scenario where you have a bunch of little tails coming together. You have a little bit of space here. I like to do a finishing, putting an X over this corner. These pieces, this connection right here, if you're doing a lot of pairing, this is going to be hit a lot. So I do a extra piece right over here. I do it on the back side just to kind of pin everything together. So one thing I don't like about a lot of people's swords designs that are popsicle sticks or flat, they never actually learn how to use a pommel or a crossguard. And so this is going to pull in, and that is just going to create a really strong joint between these two. And you have that, oh yeah, I should have taped that or glued these together. No, this is why there's so many pieces holding this together from so many different angles that it's just not important to glue these pieces together. So, oops. If you're not happy with your taping the first sword, by the 30th or 40th you'll be really good. That's what I found. So, all right, so now I have this side, so just to even this out. I'm going to start one here in this corner. I'm going to bring this around, pull this in. Down. Right. Okay, so we're 90% done with the cross guard. This is when I like to do the blade, just because I do a decorative taping here and that kind of pulls that together. Then I always finish with the handle because that's when you're getting really artsy and tired. So this takes a little bit of technique. So I'll put it between my knees. And the problem with spiral wrapping is that if you're impatient, you'll get a whole lot of creases. You'll also start to pull on your blade. Now I'm starting here and I'm put this about the angle I start with, and I'll come back and reinforce the tip on the side only, so don't worry about trying to be flush and then try to create an angle once you start. If you do that, it's stretching the duct tape, it's doing all sorts of weird things. So just accept that you're starting at an angle and then come down. I use my thumb to kind of guide the tape. Pull it out if you see a wrinkle starting. Again, this is where the temptation to just pull tight on your blade, this is where you end up compressing the foam. You want to have about a third of the duct tape overlapping the next one. You don't want to create any gaps. If there's a small gap in this foam, it will create cuts in the foam. Something gets in between. So you're basically doubling up your tape because it's a third on the top, third on the bottom. It's a little gap in between. You should only need one layer of duct tape to go on. So but this 3M tape will really protect your blade as long as you're not misusing your weapons at all. I've had these last for many years, so just take your time on putting the blade together and it'll save you time rebuilding later, because it's repatching this. The blades get kind of sketchy as you start adding more and more layers of duct tape to your blade. If you didn't tape it correctly the first time. So I come down here and I just stop it here. There's a little foam showing here, which is okay because I like to put a strip across the top. This is entirely decorative. There's no... I build a lot of loaner gear, so I like to have really obvious what team you're on. Pull this around. If you got your angle going wrong, it's okay to pull all the way back and adjust. So I have a piece that this angle started out. If you're having problems with that, you can just place it in the center or close to the center. Bring this around, make sure that all of your duct tape pieces are covered. Nice lines. Hold this down. So decorative wise, I like to add an extra piece of duct tape here because you have a lot of tails coming together, the ends of your tape, and you've now built up the tape enough. go right on. You got all those corner pieces coming up, so it almost makes an almost exact duct tape. I got a little bit of a wrinkle here, so I may go around this one more time just to make it look nice, just because I don't want to take all the tape off. So we're just doing the exact same thing on both sides. I tend to put a lot of tape down on these locations because, again, I do a lot of crossguard fighting where I'm parrying. It's kind of my fencing style. So now we're at the point where we have our duct tape done up the blade. So before I forget, I always like to come and do my finish work here. So we started at an angle. Put an extra layer going around. This helps significantly with your weapon getting what they call tippy, where if you do a lot of light hits or a lot of hits on the corner, this part of your weapon is hit 90% of the time against your opponent. So I just like to armor this up a little bit. Again, not putting any extra on the tip. And making sure I'm not creating any dog ears of tape around the edge, because again, this is where your weapon's going to impact your opponent most of the time if you fence, or your style of just hitting with the tip of your weapon. The rest of this should be nice and smooth, no real big overlaps that have, you know, the tape puckered up and creating kind of a knife edge. So what that happens is the adhesive will pull up and then dirt gets in there and just makes your life miserable there with your sword. So now we're going to do our handle, so we're almost done. So I am going to start right on the end. And cloth tape is a lot more forgiving than duct tape ever will be. And you can cheat on it, it's just horrible. And so you don't have to worry about starting that angle. It's almost like this is designed to wrap around a hockey stick or something. Oh, it's just amazing. So, and you can put multiple layers. Another technique is people will spin their tape and create, you know, wraps around it and then tape around that if you want to create kind of a grip. So it kind of depends on your preference. I like a smooth grip because I do a sliding attack with my sword. So I'm only holding onto my sword a little bit. So I also do disarming, which it's nice to be able to understand how grips work. So, and then just bring this around. So it's a nice, for my hand, so this is, again, this is 1/2 inch PVC. This brings it out to about the equivalent of a 3/4 inch PVC, which is great for a young adult male hand. If you're wearing gloves, kind of builds out quite a bit so the handle doesn't get too big. And what's really nice is you reinforce this piece. Said when I sword fight, I stick my thumb like this so that I can actually do tip control. Pommel's all in good place. So this is the end product. This would end up with a long sword. Nice ovalish shape so that you can actually, when you're attacking, you have this perception of here's the flat of the blade, here's actually the blade. You can, you know, both directions. So, but I hope you enjoy it, and look forward to having you see our next videos. Thank you.
Faire, Thurston County Fairgrounds. Free admission, only $10 to park. Check us out at Facebook and at allsfair.org.